Before getting into this video, I want to make one thing abundantly clear to all of you. I hate the idea of ignoring evidence. In a perfect world, I would be able to treat every piece of evidence equally, and, theoretically, come to a much cleaner conclusion about the lore of this franchise as a result of that. However, that's not what reality is. In reality, this franchise has multiple pieces of evidence that, on paper, almost seem redundant, like they're either unintentional or just funny little things that we were never supposed to think twice about. But because these games are made by Scott Cawthon, it feels like a coin flip most of the time on whether or not these insignificant details are unintentional and unimportant, or completely lore-defining in nature. So today, I want to talk about a few of those points that I've noticed and give my own personal input on them. My goal is to get some discussion going regarding these topics as a result of this video, since I think these are things that we ultimately need to agree on as theorists in order to reach a cohesive conclusion we're all on board with. So, without further ado, let's begin. To fully understand this one, we're going to need to take a step back and have a bit of a history lesson on the general perception of FNAF 4 over the years since its release. When it first came out, the community came to a conclusion pretty quickly. The nights we play through in FNAF 4 are just nightmares that the crying child is having. It made plenty of sense at the time and ended up being the long-standing theory for a few years. But then, Scott released the security logbook and we got something weird. We got a drawing of Nightmare Fredbear. And since this book was owned by Mike originally, that means that Mike had to see these animatronics at some point. Which means that we entirely misunderstood what FNAF 4 was trying to tell us. Either that, or Mike is the crying child, but that seems kind of impossible from what I can tell. This isn't the only revelation we had in terms of FNAF 4's nights though. A few months later, we got Ultimate Custom Night, where Nightmare Fredbear says this.
This time, there is more than an illusion to fear.
Note the word choice there, illusion. Exactly 1 year before the release of Ultimate Custom Night, we got the release of the second FNAF novel, The Twisted Ones. In it, we're first introduced to the now infamous sound illusion discs, which are used by the Twisted animatronics to change their appearance from blank animatronics into the horrid creatures we know them as. This brings me to one of the more interesting FNAF 4 animatronics, Nightmare. I have to give MatPat credit for this connection. He made a short covering this a few months ago. If you take a close look at Nightmare, you could see that behind his slightly transparent skin, you could see a blank animatronic inside of it. This, combined with the fact that he looks almost the exact same as Nightmare Fredbear, and his jump scare sounds like audio garbage, brings us to the conclusion that Nightmare may be the result of a failing illusion disc. This is a theory that I honestly really like. It's a nice callback to the games without actually muddying up the rest of the timeline. Except, well, there's a slight issue that needs to be addressed. If Nightmare Fredbear is using an illusion disc, then I'm inclined to believe the rest of the Nightmare animatronics are using them too. That's what FNAF 4 must be, a real-life nightmare created by illusion discs. But there's one thing that doesn't check out, an obscure detail that, honestly, I'm surprised people actually found. The ambiance. If you take some of the ambiance from FNAF 4, clean up the audio a little bit, and play it in reverse, you hear the phone call that plays on night 1 of FNAF 1. This means that it has to take place after FNAF 1, but that doesn't make any sense. If the Nightmare animatronics are the result of illusion discs, then someone had to actually set them up in the first place, and the only person who can do that is William. However, William is long dead by the time FNAF 1 rolls around. We know this has to be true since Phone Guy mentions the safe room where William gets Springlock being sealed up in FNAF 3, and Phone Guy dies sometime either during or before FNAF 1, so William can't be there. He has to be gone by the time that happens. So, what's the deal? Well, it means one of two things. It either means that the nights of FNAF 4 are nightmares that take place either during or after FNAF 1, or it means that the Phone Guy ambiance is a meaningless Easter egg, which means that FNAF 4 takes place, I don't know, maybe before Sister Location? That's a theory for another day though. Personally, I'm on the side of the ambiance not mattering since everything else just fits so much cleaner if that's just a silly Easter egg that doesn't matter, but I'd love to hear what you all think of it. Either way, that's one topic down. Let's get to the next one. And this one involves the minigame that I just can't get away from. Before getting into this, I should mention this since I haven't mentioned it in a full video yet. I'm making a follow-up to my Midnight Motorist video to address some of the things that I didn't fully explain, as well as correcting a couple mistakes that I did admittedly make. But for those of you watching this that haven't seen my video on it yet, Let me explain one thing to you. I don't think that we're playing as William in this minigame still. I think the argument that Orange Guy driving a purple car makes him William is redundant, since the color of the character itself is much more important for identifying them than the color of the car. I also think that the minigame being called Later That Night can mean a lot more than the minigame taking place after the death of Charlie. As an example, let me elaborate further on something that I brought up in that video. Midnight Motorist is one of the 3 minigames you need to beat for the Lorekeeper ending. That ending shows you the gravestone of William's victims. The other 2 minigames you need to beat are Fruity Maze and Security Puppet. Fruity Maze shows us the moments leading up to the death of Susie, while Security Puppet shows us the moments that Charlie dies. This establishes a pattern between the 2 minigames. 2 different victims of Afton and 2 different time periods relating to the death, one taking place just before the murder, and one taking place during the murder. This means that if the established pattern were to continue, then Midnight Motorist would be showing us the aftermath of the 3rd Afton victim. And what do you know? The minigame is called Later That Night, and we have a missing child, as well as both animatronic and human footprints in the backyard, accompanied by a broken window. The setup is there for this being exactly what the pattern would imply, but there are a few other things that I need to fully explain to convince people that this isn't about the Afton family, such as the apparent similarities between this house and the FNAF 4 house, but I'll get to that in the full video, whenever that's ready to be posted. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about a piece of evidence that I was shown via Twitter DMs the other day. Here's the full map of Midnight Motorist. Now, if you rotate it 90 degrees, you'll find that it matches up eerily well with the map of the town in the FNAF 4 minigames. The house matches up with the Afton house, and Junior's matches up with Fredbear's. On its own, this is already a crazy detail, but before we start running with it, we need to look at the bigger picture here, and I mean that very literally. As I'm sure all of you know, the map of FNAF 4 exists within the map of Sister Location, as we can see in the breaker room. Now, theoretically speaking, if we align the map of Midnight Motorist to the map of FNAF 4, we should be able to do the same to the Sister Location map. And when you do this, you come to an even crazier realization. The gravestone in Midnight Motorist matches up with the Circus Gallery, which is where you find Circus Baby, who, of course, is possessed by Elizabeth Afton. This could imply that the gravesite in Midnight Motorist is actually where Elizabeth's body is. On one hand, this actually gives us an answer that we never actually got. It tells us what William did with Elizabeth's body. When the crying child died, it was a public moment that there were multiple witnesses to, as it happened in the established restaurant. It was just a freak accident that nobody intended. But when it comes to Elizabeth's death, it was different. There were no witnesses. Elizabeth died, and nobody knew about it. And if anyone did find out about it, then people would find out that William was building animatronics with the intent of kidnapping and killing children. He couldn't let that happen, so instead, the grand opening of Circus Baby's Pizza World was abruptly cancelled due to gas leaks. This gave William time to hide all the evidence of what happened to Elizabeth and get rid of her body. He couldn't give her a proper funeral, obviously, so he had to bury her body himself, in an empty field off the side of a road that nobody ever went to. I think this makes a lot of sense, and it could be a proper explanation for what's actually going on in Midnight Motorist. Except, well, there's a bit of a paradox going on here. Let's say that this is all true for a moment. William is the orange guy, the grave is where Elizabeth's body is, and Junior's is, well, it's not Fredbear's, so let's say that it's a bar that opened up where Fredbear's was after the death of the crying child. This has the potential to work, but there's a glaring issue. We're missing a piece of the family. Elizabeth is gone, obviously. The crying child is dead if Fredbear's family diner is already closed, and the unnamed mother is most likely gone too. The fun times are already created, which includes Ballora, who seems to be made in the honor of Mrs. Afton. That leaves only William and Michael. But in Midnight Motorist, there are 3 people we need to identify. Orange Guy, the person in the chair, and the missing child. The numbers just don't line up. We're missing somebody. So in terms of this directly being the Afton family, it just doesn't work. So let's try a different approach. Let's say that Midnight Motorist is actually a parallel to the Aftons, rather than it just being them directly. Does this fix our paradox? Well, no, not really. If these are all parallels, then we can call Junior's a parallel to Fredbear's, which would mean that the crying child is alive, which fixes our original problem of not having enough family members. But it introduces some new problems. First of all, why would William not be allowed at Fredbear's? If this is happening before the death of the crying child, then there's no reason to assume that William has gone on a killing spree yet, which would mean that there's no reason for anyone to be barred from entry. especially not the person who is co-owner of the company. Furthermore, the missing child is said to be at that place again. In terms of where this place can be, well, the only place nearby that we can look at is Junior's, which is our parallel to Fredbear's. In this hypothetical scenario, the missing child is almost certainly the crying child, with Michael being the one in the chair. However, the crying child is clearly terrified of Fredbear's, so why would he break out of his window to go be there alone? And finally, we have the biggest question of them all. Why is Elizabeth already dead? William would have no reason to build child-killing robots before going on his killing spree, and he's probably not on his killing spree yet if the crying child is still alive. You can argue that he killed Charlie after the death of his own daughter, which, sure, I guess that's possible, but it doesn't explain building multiple robots with the intent of killing even more children. Now, obviously, I have my own biases, as I'm sure I demonstrated with my rant at the beginning of this section talking about why I don't think we're playing as William here. But I really don't see any way for this scenario to fit cleanly. Of course, if anyone is capable of proving me wrong, I'd love to hear it. I want to be the one who finally solves Midnight Motorist. That's kind of my goal right now. And this might be the piece of evidence that stops my theory from being true. But from what I can tell, it's not there yet. Well, there you have it. Those are the big things that I wanted to bring up in this video. Originally, I had some more things I wanted to talk about, like the fact that Chica has no bib in the FNAF 3 minigames, or the fact that the pink slips from FNAF 1 and 2 citing odor as a reasoning for termination might not actually mean that we're playing as a rotting corpse in those games. But to be entirely honest with you, I don't think I have much to say about those things apart from just that, so we'll have to settle for this. To be fair, I still think there's a decent amount to think about with just these two topics. If you think I missed anything, then be sure to let me know. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure you drop a like and subscribe to the channel. It's kinda hard to believe that I might hit 1,000 subs soon after this video goes up. Granted, that's not a huge number in the grand scheme of things, but I honestly expected to peak at like 100 subs at most, and I was perfectly fine with that. Instead, here I am a month later with every single expectation I had completely blown out of the water, so thanks. It really means a lot that people enjoy listening to me rambling about this franchise. As for my next video, hopefully it'll be the follow-up to my Midnight Motorist video that I've been talking about. Like I said, I want to be the person who finally solves that minigame once and for all. Even though a lot of people seem to think that I'm crazy and that I ignore evidence, but don't worry, I'm gonna be as thorough as I possibly can in that video. But before I even start to worry about that, I'm gonna put forth an effort to finishing these books. At least the Silver Eyes trilogy and Fazbear Frights. I'll save the Pizzaplex books for later. Hopefully I'll be able to incorporate some of the things from the books into my videos from here on out. So until then, take it easy.